Now, ISB was very smart that if they wanted these accountancy bodies to adopt IFRS, many of the countries or many of the jurisdictions, an accountancy body will resist to it. So they came out with a mechanism wherein the countries could move to uniform accounting and could also maintain the importance of the national accountancy body. Because without the existence of national accountancy body, even it will be difficult for ISB to develop standards if there is no representative of each country who can highlight the issues prevalent in their country and they can guide ISB to develop a standard. It will be very difficult for them to dissolve all the accountancy bodies around the world and say that ISB is the sole body and they'll, whatever standards they issue will be applicable globally, which is practically not possible. So there were two words in front of them. One was adoption of IFRS and one was convergence of IFRS. It was very easy to get IFRS adopted with the countries who did not have their own accountancy bodies. There were many African countries who did not have their own accountancy body. There are some Asian countries who do not have their own accountancy body, or Gulf countries, or if any country in Europe did not have their own accountancy body. It was easy for them to convince that they should adopt IFRS as part of their financial reporting requirements in their own country. So the countries who do not have their own accountancy body adopted IFRS. Adoption of IFRS means word by word. Whatever standards are issued by ISB are being adopted or being followed in these countries word by word. But the countries who had their own accountancy body, they did not want it word by word. Though US was supposed to move to IFRS, US was supposed to adopt IFRS in 2014, but they have not given any date. But the good news is that whatever new standards are coming in, like IFRS 9 financial instruments, IFRS 15 revenue from contracts with customers, they are being developed in a joint project with FASB. IFRS 15 is more or less similar to ASC 606. IFRS 16 is similar to ASC 842. In similar fashion, IFRS 17 insurance contracts will also be similar to US GAAP. So whichever new standards are being developed, they are more or less very similar to US GAAP. So if someone is learning IFRS, they're automatically being well versed in US GAAP as well, with the introduction of new standards which are being developed jointly with FASB. Though previously also they were being developed jointly, and more or less there is some similarity between IFRS and US GAAP today. Though they have not declared it openly that they are adopting IFRS, or they have not even declared that they are converging to IFRS. They're maintaining the US GAAP superiority and are making them similar to IFRS, but still maintaining that US GAAP is still different from IFRS. There are slight changes. So the difference between US GAAP and IFRS is principle based and US GAAP is rule based. They have a rule for every accounting. IFRS requires a lot of judgment. So that's the principal difference between the two gaps. Convergence means developing standards in harmony. In harmony with IFRS. So what is the way out given? That suppose if we had to convince India to move to IFRS, it was in 2008 in G20 meeting, all the G20 countries decided to move to IFRS. Some of them had already moved, like European Union decided to move to IFRS in 2005. In 2007, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa decided to move to IFRS. In 2008, India, Brazil, Argentina, Canada were supposed to move to IFRS from 1st April 2011. India was supposed to move to IFRS, and all these countries were supposed to move to IFRS from 2011 onwards. Argentina, Brazil, Canada moved to IFRS in 2011. India postponed the date, gave an indefinite date, and in 2014, when this new government came into power, they decided that we'll be moving to IFRS from 1st April 2015. So the date was given in the country for the first time. It was 1st April 2015 that we'll be moving to IFRS, and we are moving to IFRS in convergence form. And a new word was coined for India's convergence. It is known as IndAS. So IFRS in India is known as IndAS. IFRS in India is known as IndAS. IndAS is converged form of IFRS. I studied IFRS into my curriculum. Being a member of ACCA, I studied an accounting paper on IFRS. Even I had no idea whether this accounting paper, which I'm studying in the form of F7 financial reporting, is going to build my career in future. and Prime Minister Manmohan Singh will be a signatory to build my career in 2008. I was learning IFRS. I learned IFRS in 2008 because I opted for ACC in December 2007. And in the same year, we were signatory to IFRS. And suddenly luck favored the brave. And from no career to suddenly I got a career into accounting wherein I had to train chartered accountants. And it was my first job. So for me, IFRS is like passion. I use the term. I'm kind of synonymous with IFRS today as if, because this is the word which built my career in the last 10 years. It is known as IndAS, and this facility of IndAS, or a new word, is not only given to India. In Australia and New Zealand, it is known as ANZ-FRS. In Singapore, it is known as SFRS. In India, it is known as IndAS. And what is the facility given? That ANZ-FRS 1 will be the standard corresponding to IS 1. The name will be the same, presentation of financial statements. Presentation of financial statements. The standard IS 2 will be ANZ-FRS 2. In similar fashion, SFRS 1, SFRS 2. The Singapore standard SFRS 2, SFRS 1 will be same as IS 1, presentation of financial statements, and IS 2, inventories. The only difference is when they implemented. Initially, when they implemented IFRS, there was only one difference between Singapore GAAP and IFRS, that the standard on property, plant, and equipment will be applicable from a particular date, some date in 2016. There's no other significant difference between Singapore GAAP and IFRS. It's very much similar. And there's a lot of similarities between ANZ-FRS and IFRS. The only difference is these countries have converged to IFRS because they had their own national accountancy body. Same happened with India. Since we have our own national accountancy body, we also do not need to adopt IFRS. We will be converging to IFRS. And the name IndAS 1, IndAS 2 is the name applicable to the standards IS 1 and IS 2. So what about the list now? There is no IS 3, so there is no IndAS 3. There is no IS 4, no IS 5, no IS 6. The next standard is IndAS 7. Because the corresponding standard is IS 7, statement of cash flows. IS 8 is IndAS 8. IS 9 does not exist. There is no IndAS 9. IndAS 40, the corresponding standard is IS 40, investment property. IndAS 41 is the last standard in the list because IS 41 is the last standard in the list of ISs, agriculture. Now, after IS 41, since the role of issuing standards was handed over to ISB, ISB coined a new word known as IFRS 1. First time adoption of IFRS. First time adoption of IFRS. What will be the name in India for IFRS 1? Ankit, Manish, Pooja, Shraddha, or Sunil. What will be the name in India? Corresponding name.
IS 1.
IndAS 42.
IndAS 42.
Because the IndAS 1 is presentation of IFRS.
So
101.
Who's this?
Pooja.
Pooja must have gone through the list of the standards or is already learning IFRS or IndAS somewhere, or at least know the list. Isn't it? Am I right? So this must have been decided in the boardroom meeting. Someone must have suggested IndAS 42. Someone must have suggested IndAS 111. Someone may have suggested begin it from 60 or 70. There must be a lot of discussions around it. So it was finally decided that IS 1 will be IndAS 1, IS 2 will be IndAS 2, IS 40 will be IndAS 40, IS 41 will be IndAS 41. And since ISB also changed the name, our new number will be for IFRS IndAS 101. In future, if any new standard is issued, IFRS 2 share-based payments, IFRS 2 share-based payments. In India, it will be known as IndAS 102. IndAS 103 for IFRS 3 business combinations. Now, the list continues till IFRS 15, revenue, IFRS 16, leases, IFRS 17, insurance contracts. Recently in India also, we also had withdrawn the standards on IndAS 11 construction contracts, we withdrew, IndAS 18 revenue we withdrew, and we had issued a corresponding standard to IFRS 15 revenue from contracts with customers. What is the number in India? What will be the corresponding number in India?
115. Latest, right? There's a number.
5. So IFRS 15 was applicable from 1st January 2018 around the world. India decided 2 or 3 days before 1st April 18 that we'll be applying it from 1st April 18. So it was a sudden news on 28th or 29th of March that India will be moving to IndAS 115 revenue from contracts with customers from 1st April 2018. But very proactive when it was the turn of leases. They gave the declaration very early this time, not in the last moment, but they gave it around 1 month before that we'll be moving to IndAS 116 from 1st April 2019 onwards. Now you know that the standard on insurance is IFRS 17. Will you wait for Indian authorities to issue a standard on insurance and then only you learn insurance? If you are by chance working in insurance industry, what will you do?
Get prepped.
What will you do? Will you wait, or you can prepare in advance if you're proactive and if you know the difference between IFRS and IndAS?
Start getting prepared.
Start getting prepared. I hope that will make sense. Okay, because I knew early. I've been delivering session on IFRS 15 and 16 since 2017 because it was being tested in diploma and IFRS syllabus since the year 2017. It's been 2 years now. We are delivering sessions on IFRS 15 and 16, though it is getting implemented in this year in 18 and 19. IFRS 17 will not come into the syllabus of the strategic business reporting or diploma in IFRS because this is not a journal standard. The examinations are conducted on the journal standards which are relevant and applicable by almost all or the majority of the people who will be learning accounting, because this standard will not be useful for every accountant. Only the people who are working in the insurance industry will need this standard. Similarly, there are standards like standard on hyperinflationary economies or standard on retirement obligations is not applicable to all. So the examinations only test the standards which are general in nature. So we'll be tested on ISS and IFRS, but will not be tested on IFRICs and interpretations. Will not be tested on SICs and IFRICs. So we'll be learning the standards in detail which are being covered by all the accountants. But if anyone is willing to learn those IFRICs or interpretations, it's only applicable once in the lifetime of an accountant. Sometimes they need that interpretation, or only very rarely few people use it. So generally we discuss the ISS and IFRS into our sessions. Yes, Pooja? Any doubts till now?
No.
Hope you are comfortable with the flow and getting insights, how this is getting developed, what is the change. Now, another interesting thing I'll tell you, like IFRS had a lot of choices. If someone had not learned IFRS, they'll never be able to know what was existing in IFRS and what came into IndAS. Like if I talk about this standard IAS 40 investment property. IAS 40 investment property has two models, fair value model and cost model. This standard is specially for land and buildings. This standard is especially for land and buildings held for capital appreciation or for renting it out to others. Now in India, if I follow up the same model IAS 40, I should also have two models. Cost model or fair value model in IAS in IndAS 40? What do you say?
Yeah.
And if you wish to have fairer representation, we should also allow chartered accountants or the preparers of financial statements that they should also have a choice of either moving on to cost model or fair value model. But we somewhere didn't like this idea of fair value model for valuing our land and building. And we said that in IndAS 40, we'll have only one model, that is cost model. We don't want this. So if someone is learning directly in IndAS 40, they'll get to know that IndAS 40 has only one model. And it says that they'll have to follow the accounting of IAS 16 property, plant and equipment. There is a standard known as IAS 16 property, plant and equipment. Now IAS 16, in India it is known as IndAS 16 property, plant and equipment. IAS 16 is a standard for property, plant and equipment. There are two models in it. One is cost model and one is revaluation model. Again, there is a choice. IndAS 16 follows the same models. We give a choice in IndAS 16, but IAS 40 said that if you're using cost model, you need to follow the principles of IAS 16. Follow principles of IAS 16. Now look at the insight that if there was no requirement for fair value model, why would I need a new standard? Because IAS 16 is using cost model property, plant and equipment, and I could have simply said that land and building held for capital appreciation can continue to be recorded at cost model and follow the principles of IAS 16. There was no need for introducing IAS 40. But the need for introducing IAS 40 was that investment properties is a separate category. The shareholder should know that there are land and buildings which are held for capital appreciation and for renting it out to others. They are not being consumed into the business. And if the preparers of financial statement wish to show the fair value of the property, they can show it separately. Is the reason there was a choice given. But we have eliminated it completely. IndAS 40 says that there is only one model, cost model, and there is nothing known as fair value model or cost model. We do not know what is fair value model. And if you're using cost model, follow the principles of IAS 16 property, plant and equipment. But the only thing which has happened with this change is that there was a requirement in IAS 40 that we need to disclose the fair value of investment property. There was a disclosure requirement. And when we were developing IndAS 40, we have included this line. I don't know whether we did it purposely or we felt that at least we should disclose the fair value of the property. But we were asked by many preparers of financial statements, since I was in a position of accounting advisory, and we were asked that since they are recording IAS 40, IndAS 40 investment property, they're recording some of their properties under the head investment property now. They're using cost model, but this requirement they did not like, that they need to disclose the fair value of the property at least in the disclosures, because this requires the admission of a valuer. Valuer will demand some charges and there's some fees for it, and this needs to be updated at the end of each year. So it is more or less similar. The only thing is one thing is missing, that we do not allow any choice. In similar fashion, there is a standard known as IAS 1 presentation of financial statements. In presentation of financial statements, the international terminology for balance sheet is known as statement of financial position. Statement of financial position. Income statement is known as statement of profit and loss and other comprehensive income. We can continue to use the word balance sheet as part of IndAS 1 presentation of financial statements. In the statement of P&L and other comprehensive income, there is a choice that P&L can be prepared on nature of expense basis or function of expense basis. Nature of expense means, suppose depreciation is the nature of expense. function of expense, it can be part of your administration costs. If you are using nature of expense, you do not need to disclose anything. But if you are using function of expense method, you need to disclose the nature of the expense in the notes to accounts as per IFRS. If I had to decide what we should do in IndAS, IFRS gives the choice that you can disclose your expense items by nature of expense method or by function of expense method. But if you disclose by function of expense, you need to disclose the nature of expense in the notes to accounts. If you are preparing or thinking about developing a standard on the basis of IndAS, what will be your suggestion? Will you maintain the choices or you will eliminate it? And even if you eliminate the choice, which one would you like to eliminate? What is easier for you as an accountant?
Nature of expense.
Nature of expense, because if I go with the function of expense method and if I need to disclose the nature of expense, why should I bother myself?
Exactly.
Right? So in IndAS, this choice is eliminated and we have only nature of expense method. Got it? We have only nature of expense as a choice. So to sum up, if you would have learned directly IndAS and if you had no knowledge of IFRS, would you ever be able to know what we have not taken into account? What is happening globally? How the world is preparing financial statements? Are they given choice? How the world is recording their investment properties? Are they given any choice? We would have never got to know about this. So the best way out is to learn IFRS, cut it with the choices, eliminate the choices, areas where we are not very confident about, we felt that this is not going to be good for our country presentation or not in line with the policies of the government, we decided to eliminate some of the choices and we developed IndAS. So IndAS is converged form of IFRS. It is more or less similar to IFRS. You can say 90 to 95% is same. If you have knowledge of IFRS, you are not only an accountant who can work for preparation of financial statements of an Australian company or a Singapore company or a Hong Kong company. You can also prepare financial statements in Canada, Argentina, Brazil, all the G20 countries. The whole of Europe has been preparing their consolidated financial statements on the basis of IFRS. So if you have knowledge of IFRS, you are a global resource who can do accounting for anyone doing accounting anywhere in the world. You simply need to know some differences which are different from IFRS and a new gap is being developed. Hope this is clear. Any doubts? Any doubts?
No. Good.
This IAS 40 you were talking about
Yes.
is reinstated after IAS, like there was another IAS and then IAS 40 came in, right? With regards to that same IAS. Could you please?
No. No.
IAS 16.
IAS 16 is the standard on property, plant and equipment.
Okay. And
IAS 40 is the standard on investment property, a new standard for land and buildings.
okay, so initially land and building were valued under IAS 16.
Under IAS 16 property, plant and equipment.
Right. Okay.
So it was decided. So what the difference between them I'll be discussing tomorrow when I'm discussing classification of assets.
Right.
So classification of assets. So the IFRS is principle based. IFRS is intention based.
Yeah.
If you plan to consume any asset in the business, you will record it under IAS 16 property, plant and equipment.
Right. And if you just want to do it as investment, then it falls in
If you want to simply invest for capital appreciation and since it is vacant for the time being, you can rent it out, but your renting is not your principal revenue generating activity. It will be classified under the head investment property, but you will be recording income, but that will not be considered your principal revenue generating activity.
Right, understood.
But if your business is of renting, then that property will be forming part of your inventories. If you're into sale of buildings. Okay, that classification I'll be discussing tomorrow when I'm discussing classification of assets, how these are interrelated. Okay. You can keep yourself on mute when you ask queries, just unmute them. Okay.